Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to revisit one of the first projects I did. It was actually the fourth video on my channel, and that was an Edwardian chemise. So let's see what we've learned along the way. Right after I posted the video, a couple of years ago actually by this point, my best friend said, "Oh, that would make an adorable nightgown." And shortly after that, I bought some fabric, and then I didn't touch this project for a very long time. But since I am trying to kickstart my channel back into gear after having taken a few months off, I thought this would be the perfect time to pull out a relatively quick and easy project, and it ended up taking me all month. So what I wanted to do was twofold. I wanted to revisit my actual chemise that I made in that video and fix a few problems with it. And number two, I wanted to make a nightgown based on the same pattern, but with all the improvements I had learned along the way. So let's step through the problems with the original chemise and the things that I changed. But first, let me show you the actual chemise instead of this nightgown. So this is my new chemise, sort of. It is the original from about here down. It's got the same ruffle on the bottom and everything else, but the top is different, and it is a completely different design, but it's based on the same pattern. And I'm going to try to not spend too much explaining what exactly I did, but I am going to reference it, and in the future the chemise is going to look like that instead of what it was before. So in case you're wondering why it suddenly looks different, it's because I altered it. But let's step through the problems with the original chemise. Number one, raw seams. For some reason, this fabric, especially after washing, frays quite a bit. Not horribly, but it ends up with these like strings that just aren't that great and are very easy, especially along the hem, to like catch on your shoe. And so I wanted to make sure that with the new chemise, I did not have any raw seams. They were either going to be hidden between two layers of fabric, or they would be French seamed or something. The other thing was I didn't like how the bodice worked. For some reason it kind of stood out a little bit, which was kind of uncomfortable. And the way that I had the lace never really looked right. But beyond that, the other major problem was the armholes. Now on the original pattern, the armhole was like about here and here. At some point after I published that video, I had actually gone back and opened up some of the side seam and like retucked it around to try to make the armholes a little bit bigger so they weren't rubbing as tightly on my arms, which was very uncomfortable. But it didn't look right. It was messily done. I really didn't like it. And I felt like the bodice was just at the point where it wasn't really worth trying to salvage it anymore because I needed to make so many like fundamental changes. So when I decided I was going to make this nightgown, I started from scratch. I drafted the whole pattern from scratch, and I used a scale for both width and height. It was very similar. Honestly, it wasn't that different. I knew that I was going to want to have the whole fit on the top figured out before I moved on to the nightgown, because I did not have much fabric for the nightgown. So I made this kind of all over yoke instead of the yoke just being in the middle. And that was just a very minor pattern adjustment where I basically just got rid of the gathers in the center. And I had to go through the process of fitting the armhole, I think 3 or 4 times. I didn't get any footage of it. I'm sorry about that. But I ended up moving this part of the armhole this direction, like 1.5 inches or so, and I moved this part back like maybe 3/4, and I moved this part of the armhole down 3/4. It was just a mess. Now, small armholes are historically accurate. You were supposed to have smaller armholes, especially when there's sleeves involved, because you actually have a greater range of movement if you don't have a lot of fabric connecting all the way down here. Like this has a fairly small armhole, and I can do a bunch without my shirt really pulling up. That's good. However, if you go too far with that, it's not going to be comfortable at all. So the problem was that if you have fabric that's here, which is about where it was, then this part of the armhole is supposed to be on this side of the arm. You can kind of see how there's a little arm nub here, which helps indicate where this arm is supposed to be. If you have fabric here, it's going to pull this forward, and that moves the back fabric as well. So when you have the back fabric being really stretched, it's suddenly pulling against the arms here and is stretching everything this way in order to get this whole thing to fit. So suddenly you have a lot of tightness in the back, which is extremely uncomfortable and means that you can't move your arms forward at all. And then the whole front is kind of doing this. So this neckline area is all weird and warpy because everything's having to get pulled forward in order to get those armholes in the right spot. So if the top part of your bodice is not fitting, it could be the armholes. It might not always, but if you're having this weird like stretching across the back, you might not need more room in the back. You might just need to take the armholes in a little bit this direction. And like I said, I pulled out like an inch and a half or so of fabric here and a little bit in the back as well. And I lowered it a little bit. And this is still quite small on me, but it's way, way better than the other one. I also did 2 layers on all the bodice pieces. So this is fully lined on the top, which means that this armhole is nice and soft. There is no raw edges here. This whole thing was a lot of practice for me figuring out how to cover up raw edges and how to make sure that this was fitting correctly before I moved on to the nightgown. So when it came to the actual nightgown, I wanted it to be much more similar to my original chemise. So it has this separate yoke, and it has a yoke in the back. And you can go to my previous video to learn why this yoke in the back was a huge headache. Number 1 priority with this project was comfort. I did not want there to be any raw seams. I wanted it to be very washable, but primarily I wanted it to be comfortable. So there are no raw seams on the inside for comfort's sake. The yokes, again, are double lined. So it looks like this is just a single layer, but this is actually 2 on both the front and the back. And I also changed the armholes even more. So you can see the actual armhole is down here, and I took it about another 1.5 inches from where I had mine. So I'm hoping that this will be super comfy. The process of actually putting this together wasn't too difficult. I started with adding the back yoke onto this so that I had something to put the gathers onto. Then I added the lace and then the top yoke, and then I did basically the same steps for the back over here. So I added the lining of the yoke and then the lace and then the outside part of the yoke. A video popped up on my YouTube homepage by, I believe her username is Tasha Could Make That. I'll put it right here. All about this clever bias tape trick that she learned from a 1940s or 50s pattern that told you to finish the bias before you add the side seam, so that all of the edges of the bias tape are hidden within that seam. And for the neckline, that meant I finished one shoulder French seamed, this one, and then I added the lace and then the bias tape, and then I finished up the other shoulder. The thing about this technique is it does make very bulky seams because you have an extra 4 layers of fabric and then folded back on itself. So it does add up pretty quick. So I don't think I would do the same thing next time I use a fabric that's this thick. It is soft and breathable, but it is a pretty thick stretch fabric, partially because I knew this was going to be a nightgown and I didn't want it to be see-through. It is not at all. It is very soft. It is very stretchy, but it is also kind of sturdy and bulky. So we do have slightly bulky seams, and I hope that that's not going to be a problem. But in general, I think it's going to be pretty comfortable. I really like how this bit turned out. It's kind of a little homage to the original with the little loops of lace. It's really small, but it helps tie everything together. And I think I finally got the armholes to a comfortable position. With every project, you're going to learn a lot of new techniques and skills. There are a lot of things that I did on this one that I had never really done before, like trying to figure out how to make the corners here work nicely with the lace and everything. It was a lot of layers that all wanted to kind of go in different directions under the sewing machine. I had never really worked with stretchy fabric before. The original chemise, yeah, it's stretchy, but it's also just in general a really lightweight fabric. But this one is a little bit thicker while still being stretchy. So it was a very different experience trying to figure out how to sew with this kind of fabric. And I'm really glad that my chemise now has nice finished armholes that are a lot more comfortable than they had been before. So it's been fun going back to a project that was one of the first sewing projects that I had done on this channel, and figuring out what techniques I've learned along the way, and adding a bunch of new ones. I have a lot of exciting projects coming over the next couple of months. I've got a crochet project that I've been working on since 2023, and I have the Alice bodice still to finish. That has a lot of fitting issues, which is part of why I did a fitting project this month. And I have a 1890s corset that I want to make before I start tackling my 1890s bodice, because I realized several months ago that that bodice is just not going to fit unless I have the correct underpinnings, which I knew I was just being a little lazy about, I think. So stay tuned for a lot of exciting projects, and I will see you next month.